Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
The National Parks Arts Foundation selects any sort of artist for national park residencies, from traditional landscape painters, photographers, to performers, installations, film, video, writers, poets, sound artists, new arts, media, you name it. They're cool. And you get to stay in a park for a month. Or outside the park, in the park region, where you get to focus on your art for a month. And we're very excited because photographer and mixed media sculpture artist John-Ferdico is joining us. He is their current artist in residence at Hawai'i Volcanoes National Park. He's going to tell us about his projects and his art. This is just completely unique, and that's the way art should be, right? And very excited to have him on. I encourage everyone to go to nationalparks-arts-foundation.org and have a look at these amazing residencies. So we've got Hawai'i Volcanoes National Park, where the house is that you get to stay. We call it the Art B&B. It's not where the lava is flying. And I'm literally saying that. But there's residencies at Dry Tortugas National Park in the Florida Keys, where you're staying on this remote island for a month. There's a Chaco Cultural National Historical Park up in New Mexico, among these ancient ruins. I mean, this is amazing, the different places you can stay. So artists, writers, photographers, musicians, if you do any part of the arts, dancers, go to nationalparks-arts-foundation.org and check it out. Now we've got John here, and John, are you in the Art B&B?
I am as we speak, yeah.
Oh, man, it's beautiful. So this is, a lot of times the parks, you're actually staying in the park, but you're right on the outside of like the new portion of Hawai'i Volcanoes National Park, right?
Yeah, actually, the house is really down at the south point of the island. So it's very far south from the volcano proper. And there's a relatively new part of the park called the Kahuku Unit, which is very nearby here. It's an old ranch that was given to the park, or the park bought, I think 2003, if I remember correctly, and essentially sort of added it to the Hawai'i Volcanoes Park. That part of the park, by the way, is still open. We're about 40 miles from the actual eruption, so we're essentially far enough away that we don't see any of the impact except some of the fog.
Okay. Wow. It's so trippy to think. And over here on the mainland, you're watching all this activity, and it feels so far away, yet it's like, this is part of our country. It's just such an interesting thing what's going on with Mother Nature out there. And, when I tell people, hey, no, we're talking to an artist, at Hawai'i Volcanoes National Park, they're like, how did they get in there? And it's like, no, it's open, but there's that one portion. It's really great to have you on. But you do live in Hawaii, right?
I do, yeah. In fact, I live on the Big Island, on the west side of the island in Kailua Kona.
Okay. And so now you get to just hop to the other islands and hang out. And
I'm on the same island, actually.
I know. I got to get my island straight here. I need the map. Get Google quick.
I'm actually I think it's about an hour and 30-minute drive from where I live. The residency itself. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So this is cool. I don't think we've had a local on the show before.
I think they told me that I'm actually the first Big Island resident to win a residency here on the island.
Wow.
So, yeah,
and
it seems like a strange thing to sort of not go somewhere much further away. But it was kind of a unique opportunity for me and my work, so I'm really happy to be able to do it.
What led you to apply in the first place? Like, what was it? Was it about the parks part of it, or was it hey, I get to create for a month? What led you to do it?
Both of those things. Traditionally, an artist residency really is all about being able to put a piece of time sort of just where you can work on your work and nothing else. What I always think is one of the hardest things for a modern artist to find is a prolonged period of concentration on their own work. And residencies are designed generally just to give you exactly that. So, that was, of course, one of the immediate draws. But the other thing, having moved to Hawaii and starting to learn the culture and stuff, the volcano itself and the legends and mythologies around it kind of connected with my own interests in my work. And so the idea that I could actually have greater access to it than I might, just driving over and visiting the national park was the initial draw to it.
Interesting, yeah, because you also lived in California, right? beforehand?
Yeah. Lived in Oakland, California for many years, right?
Oh, right on, man. We haven't been there for a while, man. That's like a hub of action. Oakland's neat, and artistically too. There's some interesting things going on in Oakland, Berkeley. That all the way down. I know you lived in LA, but you also teach art, right?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, it's a really interesting experience to move to Hawaii after living in the Bay Area for so many years. Oakland, San Francisco area really is kind of one of the biggest hubs of fine art practice in the world, really. And Hawaii, of course, is a very remote, and the Big Island especially is a very rural place. In fact, I was born in New York, and I lived most of my life in big cities, and so I'm living in the country for the first time in my life, essentially.
Wow. That's funny. I know. Now, I want to talk about your art because what I've seen of it is these airplanes with faces and images on it, and then some of them look really giant to me. So, like, explain the airplane part of it, because that kind of connects to your childhood too, right? With your dad, and this is fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, but
I don't know where to start. Go to the TSA first. No.
I don't know. I never know where to start either. It's because it's been really a lifelong process. It's kind of a culmination or of a variety of interests that I have, both in art and various hobbies and various ideas and things like that. And so, what I'm hoping to do, which I think all modernist artists do, is just sort of, take the realm of my experience and make something out of it. And the pieces you're talking about, the model airplanes with pictures on them, ended up what I made. And I still scratch my head and look when I'm looking at them sometimes as well. But to me, that's the appeal of them, is that they're, we learned this concept way back when I was in art school, but the anxious object. You make a thing and the thing itself isn't quite sure what it is. And that's always been an appealing idea to me. So I've strived to make that kind of expression. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's neat that we're both like, let's all talk at once. The eyes, the eyes on the airplanes, like the eyes on the wings. To me, almost turn the airplanes into butterflies. And
that's where that started. I got interested in ideas about camouflage and how how essentially camouflage makes one thing try to look like another thing. And I thought that was a fascinating idea. And of course, the various intents behind camouflage could be twofold, right? One is to make you disappear so that a predator or something can't see you, right? But the other is to assert your appearance, right? To make you look too frightening to attack or that way. And so I thought it was a kind of a fascinating kind of image in the sense of, how is this image supposed to function? Is this, by using the image of a warplane and then putting a portrait on it, is it an inviting portrait? Is it a challenging one in that way? And so it's those kinds of visual or in terms of what the viewer is doing, it's those kinds of reactions I hope to get from viewers in that way.
When you exhibit your work, what kind of questions do you normally get?
Good question, Nancy. 10 points for that.
It's funny because I think a lot of people who seem to enjoy them for different reasons. One, because of the craft aspect of it. How did you make that? Is a common question. What oftentimes they're actually photographs that are transferred to the surfaces, but what I strive to do is try to make them look like they're painted on, just like you would paint, put a coat of paint or illustrate something in that way. And so, people ask me, did I paint it on? How did this come to be in that way? And I think that's the way that people generally approach the work, is sort of looking at it and going, how did you make this? Tends to be the most. There are a few people ask, why did you make this? And that's fine. I find a much more difficult question to answer.
It's interesting because how big are they? Or how they look?
They tend to be small.
Yeah.
For practical reasons, I have this dream of making a giant, monumental sculpture at one of these things one of these days. But that so far it's a difficult thing to
I want to see it in
pull
the air
off.
park.
But I'm also,
you know what?
Yeah.
So sometimes you watch those TV programs and you see people who had taken a real airplane, an old one, and made a tree house out of it. So you could just go get one of those and put it on the island somewhere, decorate it, and live in it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I like it because you're also putting the plane.
I think I'll keep the condo for now, but maybe that'll be my summer home. I'm not sure. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
No, but it's so interesting because you've got collections with different faces, and I want to talk about what you're working on now for Hawaii's volcanoes and your visions for that. But when you look, number one, the eyes part of it makes you really think, and you start getting different stories for the different people on the airplanes. That's what to me. I'm like, okay, and then are they looking at each other? So when you put them together in a collection and display them as in an exhibit, are you placing them so that everyone's having a conversation, or do you change it up each time?
No, actually, and in fact, the images specifically were the portraits, because I've done different kinds of things in terms of the imagery on the airplanes. And the ones with the portraits were actually designed to be installed. I did them for a show at the Honolulu Museum of Art a few years back, and they designed them to actually be mounted on the wall, looking out at the viewer, much like a portrait photograph would be. But we also installed them so that the airplanes themselves were actually in a formation that reflected how aircraft in formation would actually fly. So there's what I try to do in those cases is kind of create these kind of strange visual layers where it's like, am I looking at a picture of a formation of airplanes? Am I looking at a series of portraits? When hopefully kind of you realize you're looking at both at the same time.
Yeah,
when an airplane goes over and you're outside, we all look up.
Yeah.
Now I feel like almost looking back.
I know. It's like you could have a conversation, but it makes you think, and it is interesting because to me, there's like a conversation going on. But I remember in Alexandria, Louisiana, there's an airport there that remember we went, there was like this little airport before you get to the airport. They have fountains and it's all lush and pretty. But they have these historic, I think, planes from World War II, I think, because they're the same kind of style of the airplane models that you've made. I don't know much about planes, but they look like that. But then the mouth of the plane, the front of the plane, some of them, they painted them so that they were like mouths with teeth. Like one looked like jaws.
Yeah.
And so,
tigers.
Yeah, it was super cool. I was like, look at that. And all the ones were different. So I don't know if that was a war thing or if they did that after. I know nothing really about planes other than it's trippy that people can fly them, period. Like whenever you watch a plane take off, you look at how big those things are, like the big ones now that carry passengers. And it's just absolutely mind-blowing. It's crazy. It's crazy. To me, it's crazy. But where did those
it's endlessly fascinating to me too when you see exactly that. And that's what my interest in aviation have been lifelong for that reason. And I think that's it fundamentally, right? It's like, how does this thing get in the air?
Yeah.
I kind of understand science and enough to know why, but then you go up and you knock your fist on it and go, no, this thing can't get here. How can it move 600 miles an hour? It's an impressive thing. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that I really find them sort of enduringly interesting to me as an image in my art making, because the scope of what they represent, especially warplanes, which is a real problematic representation. I think I've written about it in my own work in the past, where the idea is that, they, at the same time, they are emblems of some of the greatest accomplishments scientifically and things like that we can make these things do that. And then, of course, on the other thing, they're morally and ethically problematic. And it's that tension, in the ideas about aviation in general and warplanes in specific that I find very interesting and I like to work with in my own work.
Airplanes represent change and transformation. And so when I look at your work, there's that butterfly part. There's the eyes remind me of the butterflies, where, they have, sometimes you think it's the eye of a bird and it's not, how they like camouflage, what you were talking about earlier. But what I find fascinating is you're primarily a photographer, and now you've taken your photography and made it into a sculpture. Like, that's cool, man. I know that's apparently installation art, mixed media art. Don't ask me about, ask me about music genres. I can get into that. And even then, I think it's all connected, man. But but it's interesting to me because you've taken photography and given it this extra depth that beyond here it is on the wall in a frame. And I'm not knocking photography whatsoever, man, because I'm all into that. But you've done this extra,
the layer.
Like, it's like 3D printing kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't get that either.
Yeah, I don't get that.
I'll tell you. That's exactly how it started, because it's funny because when I went to art school, I fully expected to study painting. When I was a kid, I never, took pictures. I drew and I painted and I made things. I made models and, and sculptures and things like that, So I had this real traditional idea about what an artist was and what art was and, what I wanted to do. Long story short, I kind of panicked in my freshman year of art school, decided I was a terrible painter. And it was at that time that I took my first photography class, which was required at the time. This is at the Kansas City Art Institute. And and so in a panic, I just decided, I'm a photographer now. And I switched majors at that point. What I found was that I loved photographic imagery, and I realized I'd always been, ever since I was a little kid, I was flipping through photo books and things like that. And so my relationship to imagery actually had more to do with photography than it did with painting in that way. Now, the downside of it was that I wasn't a very good photographer. Suddenly, I was in this program where all these people, like I had been drawing and painting since I was 5, these people could take photographs since they were 5. So I was way behind the curve on that aspect. But I also found that I wasn't very interested in the traditional photographic presentation, hanging a black and white print in a mountain of frame on the wall just seemed kind of boring to me, So I followed my earlier impulses to cut pictures out and glue them on things and play around with them that way. Which is ultimately where I came to this idea. In fact, the model airplanes happened at that time, the first kind of iterations of them, because one of my photo professors told me that it was clear that I was struggling in the medium of photography since I was less familiar with it. And he told me, he said, the way to solve that is to find something you love working with. And so actually, it was over a Christmas break. A buddy of mine and I from class, we were sitting around talking about what the Professor Gary Sutton was his name had told us, and we kind of said, well, what do we like? What do we like sort of making? And we started talking about how we both built model airplanes as a kid. So it's Christmas break. We have nothing else to do. We find a nearby hobby shop and we drive off and we bought some model airplanes and spent the rest of the Christmas break building these models. And I decided,
toys.
I'm going to try that. Gary told me to incorporate something into my photography, so I started playing around with that, and here I am, 20, 30 years later, still doing it.
No, see, that's awesome.
Art school, art colleges are terrifying. I had an experience with an art college because I like to paint very realistic paintings of animals, but I had to paint an abstract, and I couldn't see, no matter what I did, the professor's like, that's not an abstract, and I'm like, what? I don't get it. So I went to the Los Angeles Zoo and I bought one of the prints that the chimpanzees make. They give them blue, red, and yellow bottles of paint. Turned it in, and then he said, Nancy's had a major breakthrough. And I'm like, not really. But, and I'm like, well,
your breakthrough was you became a conceptual artist. Is what that was.
Yeah, so I'm like, I see how to get past you.
Yeah, I know.
But I think people, the idea of swapping your mind from where it is to something completely foreign is not easy. It's
cool.
And then you have a teacher who comes along and tells you you're all wrong. And, what I was handing in was really abstract because I look at it and go, I have no idea what that is.
You realize, Nancy, you're talking to a teacher here.
I know.
Hi.
Well, but it's funny because that's kind of exactly the experience I had as a freshman in art school. When I came into studying art at that level, my ideas and the things that have been reinforced with me through, high school and when I was a kid drawing and stuff is essentially, the more something looked realistic. Literally, I realized later, my criteria for what made a good painting or drawing was how close it looked to be to a photograph.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I kind of realized in art class. Like, why am I bothering this? Why not just be a photographer if that's what you're going for? So I had to change mediums to kind of grapple with that idea. But I had the same thing. Like, people, we would deal with abstraction. We would deal with the idea that drawing was about line. It wasn't about image. And that was utterly foreign to me at the time. Ideas I come to appreciate now, but, I couldn't just cope with it when I was 18, 19 years old at the time. It was
It's weird, that process. Then I had the experience after actually making a living as a wildlife artist, meeting an editor of a wildlife magazine that I love this magazine. And I had a chance to meet him in Fallbrook, California. And he was, wildlife art is not considered art. And I was like, oh, God, here we go again. Leave me alone. Stop it. You had to do the duck stamp contest, and everything had to be exactly like a photograph. And I'm like, well, okay, on the one side, you can't look like a photograph. On the other side, you must look like a photograph. So paint something other than animals.
Yeah, but you're like impressionistic with your art. You've got the real, and impressionism came from realism. It was based on realism. And then here comes the French. Then America said, okay, finally, we'll be okay about it. But look how they didn't like that. America,
it's just odd.
Weir said no to it, and then he became America's, most beloved impressionist. So, I'm looking at your art now, and that's realism with a lot of impressionism rubbed in there. So just saying. And that's what I think what is so interesting, John, with what you're doing is you're making us think outside. And I think it's being an educator. Do you find that experience that you had as a freshman now, like what you're doing with your art, is that helpful for you when you're working with students and they're doing their art and being able to guide them more towards do something you love and be open-minded and go with it, go with your soul?
Yeah, absolutely. At the core of my ideas about teaching art, especially nowadays, is just that thing. Is it's like you really have to learn to think differently. You have to challenge yourself into, and I think Nancy's experience in my and moving to Hawaii actually had a lot to do with me rethinking that, because again, I moved from this extremely vibrant, high-end kind of artistic community in the Bay Area to this essentially rural place. And as an artist, my first question had to be, it's like, what is art here? What art do I want to make here? And does the place kind of change how you think about that? And it definitely did. And one of the things I realized was that it's, art is something that any individual defines for themselves based on local conditions in some cases. And it's really interesting for my teaching, because teaching in the Bay Area, there's an entire market around that community that artists can move into and have careers, whether they be showing in galleries or working for the big advertisers and things like that, And so you tend to teach with that in mind, that you're moving students toward this particular idea. Out here in Hawaii, especially in the Big Island, and Honolulu may be different, but of course that's a whole nother island. There's not really an art economy per se. There aren't galleries that artists can make a living at selling work. I do, commercial photography for walking around money here and there, which I could do, it would just fall on my lap in the Bay Area. And here, there's just not a lot of that happens. And so, now I've got students come in and say, I want to learn to be a photographer. I want to learn digital imaging or something like that. And you sort of realize it's like, okay, but what am I teaching them to do? The answer to that question is fundamentally different here. And I realize that really goes back to your own thing. What do I want to do here? The answer here is fundamentally different as well.
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember taking a writing course, when I knew this is where I want to go with things. And the first thing they did is like, you have to write your own biography, your self-profile, like why do you want to be a writer kind of thing. And I went, well, this really sucks. and I remember like, you know what I mean?
Did you ever answer that question or?
Yeah, I just kind of was like, they were like, write about why you want to do this. And I was like, okay, it just was like, because it wasn't about, you had to like really, you knew you have your emotional response, and you had to get past that into the nitty gritty of what you want to do. And it is that. I mean, I think everyone goes through that with whatever choices they make in their life, whether it be marriage, whether it be, hey, I'm buying a car. Do I really want this car? Is that salesperson just telling me that's what I need? And I think when you start making those decisions and being completely honest with yourself, that's when you find your true path. And that's the coolest thing about life, is those lessons.
Yeah.
That's my psychology for today.
Well, you go.
But I think that's really true. And being able to, I think that's what's neat about college, is having the time to contemplate and have that time to do that. Because once you're in that fast track world, sometimes we forget to just think and contemplate and do some soul searching and breathe and get those answers we want. And they don't just come overnight. Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
My trajectory was, when I went to art school, I imagined some sort of career as an artist. And that evolved into realizing that art was, in this day and age at least, was less of a career and more of a vocation. And I've since amended that. And at this point, I'm truly comfortable with thinking of it actually more, it's a pilgrimage for me. It really is more about, that kind of quest for some sort of intellectual, emotional kind of satisfaction than it is, a way to make a living or something like that. And
I like
it's
that's a good word. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Because it's steady.
You end up doing things you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
When you try to make a living, I cut silhouettes out on a trip through South Africa. I made money doing that. In England, I made money by painting dog portraits because they really like their dogs over there.
But it's not truly your soul's passion,
No, it wasn't like, but it was still painting. I'm like, well, you can either go be a banker or something or paint. Lisa's practice.
But pilgrimage, I love that because it's allowing you to have a journey instead of like the A to B quick trip. It's not fast food. You know what I mean? It's
right. And I think I realize that's where the true satisfaction in, looking back at your life and saying, well, I was an artist. It's going to come from that. It's not going to come from the career aspect of it. It's not even going to come from the vocational aspects of it. It really is that pilgrimage that I think will be the thing that I find gratifying at the end of it all.
Yeah, that's the word of the day, man. I'm going to write that. I have a map on the wall, and it's like, like every other day something like this happens, and I have to go write it down because you don't want to forget that. I like that. That's the word of the day or the week.
Cool.
The word of life. I like it. Cool. Yeah, good teacher, man. So now let's talk about Hawaii. Being there, so you're an hour and a bit away from home. Which I think is a trip. And you're staying in this beautiful art B&B. I mean, the Airbnb home is like, seriously, you could have a good party in that place. It's beautiful. I've seen
I've
photos.
resisted the urge so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you do, call us.
Okay? It's kind of hard to not invite. Right. It's kind of hard to not invite all your friends down.
Yeah.
But I thought I would do that at least like one weekend, and then I got here and it was like, no, I want it all to myself.
It's so peaceful looking, right?
Yeah, and it really is peaceful. Yeah.
And what are you working on for this residency? Because I know we've got we've seen the work of your work with the eyes, and now what are you going to do here? Is it going to be people, or are it going to be plants, nature?
It's going to be and I'll tell you, it started because you kind of have to make that clear when you apply for the residency. They ask you the same question: what are you going to do? And I think you're sort of judged on your application is judged in part on how you're going to use the time. And I saw a great opportunity in having access to the park because I was interested in landscape photography in terms of the model planes. I'd started with different kinds of almost sort of like religious imagery. I would use figure forms that were really reminiscent of Renaissance devotional painting and things like that on the images. Then I moved I wanted to simplify it, so I moved into the portraiture, and now I'm thinking, well, then I got interested in these camouflage ideas, and so the landscape seemed sort of a natural progression into that. So I decided, that I wanted to deal with the landscape, and of course, in Hawaii, not only is there an abundance of beautiful landscape, but there's also an abundance of interesting issues, ecological issues, cultural issues, and stuff that were appealing to me. And so I kind of wrote it up that way that I would, and of course at this point I expected to be at the volcano site itself, because by the way the application was due, I want to say the deadline was like a week and a half before the eruption. So none of us had any idea that we would not be traipsing along the slopes of Kilauea right now. But as it turned out, it was really fortunate for me because, as you know, the Kahuku unit is still open. And so I've been spending most of the days that it's open in the park, just doing the tours and hiking around and taking photographs. And then it got kind of scary because I realized it's like, okay, what do photographers do in national parks? And of course, the first example that comes to mind is Ansel Adams. And my thought was then, I am in way over my head here. Because those are tall shoes to fill, But I realized, I calmed down because I realized I was actually moving into the national parks much less like Ansel Adams and much more like his predecessors. You may be familiar with the history of, American landscape photography began as a scientific geological surveys. The first photographers who brought back the images in the same places that Ansel Adams went to were commissioned by the government to go take images as part of geological surveys. And I realized I was kind of approaching it more that way. I was making records of things. My ideas right now really are about sort of the relationship between invasive species and non-native species and natural species and stuff. And so, and I see that the images I'll ultimately probably use for the airplane pieces, which is what I hope to sort of be the culmination of this residency, will probably come from those. And which may be just a great rationalization of looking at the photographs of taking game. These are not nearly as good as Ansel Adams photographs, but
what I find really fascinating when you think about invasive species, there's native, non-native invasive species, and so culturally, it ties. Am I going to get in trouble? No, it really does in an interesting way. When you look at the world of botany, and you've got plants, like the Venus flytrap that'll, bite you, kind of thing. But then there's the invasives. And so, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, it's fascinating to me because they have their wars too, just like we do. It's like, and there's the parasitic community, and like, mistletoe living in this tree, but it does this over here, but it doesn't do, this gets injured, this doesn't. So it's interesting to me because you can basically see people in plants and animals and how that happens. And culturally, even the airplanes to me connect in history for Hawaii very much so. So there's like a cultural, historical thing going on with that, even though you're looking at today's plants, whether the species are invasive or not. It's connected in a really. I know Nancy's looking at me going, "What?"
Well, yeah, that's kind of where I ended up. It's interesting when you move here. We moved here about 7-8 years ago now and it's a remarkable experience to move to Hawaii, especially if you really sort of pay attention to how different this place is from the mainland, and the district, having grown up in a very deeply steeped in Western civilization, and then realizing now you're in a community, and I really have been migrating west my whole life. I was born in New York, spent some time in Kansas City when I was in high school and college there, and then lived in California for that time. And I just keep going, right? Yeah. I joke with my friends I'll probably be buried in Manila somehow, so end up there. But the idea that let's put it this way: it's like I started thinking, am I an invasive species?
Okay, so we're on the same side.
It's a strange question to ask. So I think part of the ideas that I'm kind of working through and hope to express in the work that culminates here is exactly that. Where is my position in all of this?
Wow, we came full circle.
And I think it's something
looking at what our intent is again, like where. Here it is. That's okay. So, have you ever thought of working with Hindu deities on airplanes? Because when I look at your work, I want to see Shiva on a plane. Like I know that
I'll tell you,
crazy, but I see it.
Yeah. I wish I knew more about a variety of other cultures, including Hawaiian culture, which I'm slowly learning. But it's an interesting story because I was right around the same time, sometime during college, the story we were talking about earlier. I was at a swap meet in Kansas City, and somebody had been importing these little wooden sculptures of Hindu deities from, I believe it was from Burma or Indonesia, that these came from originally. And I knew nothing about them, but I bought a few, and they hang in my studio to this day. So visually, those are extremely inspirational and influential for me, because I came to that same sort of, I looked at them and said, wow, those are just remarkable. And I need to have that. And it's funny because what I do know, they were winged goddesses, and that was the thing that it struck me, being deeply steeped in, I describe myself often as culturally as an Irish, Italian, Catholic New Yorker. It pretty much sums it up.
I'm coming to your house for food. That sounds like good food.
I make a great big ziti, right? Yeah. But I realized that there is these connections in these mythologies, whether it be Hindu or Hawaiian, and of course we talked about this earlier, but flight itself to me is a fascinating sort of link between the ideas of ascension, essentially, are common in so many different religions and mythologies and things like that, and so seeing the imagery of these things, it really sort of, it made me think, and maybe that's the answer to the question you asked earlier, what the work is about, is it really is just like, well, if we were to continue making these little sort of folk art sculptures about our beliefs and ideas, what would they look like today? What would they look like in our culture? And that's, that's kind of what I do.
Okay, I have a question. So on the airplane, you got the propeller thing at the front, right? I am right on that. That's a propeller.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the flower, Nancy, you know what I'm talking about, the flower, and I know the name, but I can't remember.
The lotus?
No, the Hawaiian one. Not
Hibiscus?
No. It's the white one. The white, oh man, I know they grow in Hawaii all over.
Frangipani.
Not the orchids, or?
No, I think the frangipani. It could be that. They're like, we used to have them all over Kenya. Plumeria, thank you.
Oh, okay, Plumeria's right, yeah.
Yeah, the plumeria. Don't you think that looks like a propeller? I'm just saying. Can you put...
It kind of does, yeah.
Can't you?
I might have to steal that idea. Yeah.
I want to do this now. I'm all into this. I'm like, this is cool. And okay, so do you ever do any other kinds of models, or is it always going to be airplanes? Do you ever see yourself, I don't know what,
like warships?
Yeah, like dinosaur models, and then do stuff on the dinosaurs.
Dinosaur models were my first love, actually. They were, when I was I used to live in suburban New York, and we used to go to Woolworths when I was a kid. Mom would drag you on your Saturday afternoon shopping trip, and they had a whole display on one of the ends of the aisles of these dinosaur models, and I would just sit there and drool while my mom shopped. But those I've had, there are two things that are interesting to me to talk about that. One is, I've done a lot of different kinds of things that way. Some of the imagery, for instance, really is sort of a personal history and family history. My grandfather drove a tank in World War II in the Philippines, and so I played around with tanks and then cars and all sorts of different models and sort of sculptures, figure sculpting and things like that. But I never really sort of connected with them as much as I did in terms of the ideas of the work, at least in terms as I did with the airplanes. And I think it is because it tied into those cultural ideas I'd grown up, looking at the paintings of the saints and the angels in the Catholic Church and stuff, and sort of recognizing a kind of kinship with that imagery. And so the airplanes did that. The other thing that I did, and people actually, this is you've asked what kind of questions I'd get. A lot of people would ask me, how I built the model, and they were surprised, and I think sometimes a little disappointed to realize that they're actually commercially available hobby kits, that they start life that way. And I always felt kind of like I was cheating, by doing that. And so there was a time actually where I was doing these sculptures out of various, woods and papers and things like that. But I never liked how they looked as much. And I finally realized that the reason I didn't like them is because what I was doing is I was making folk art. I was using, much like throughout history and cultures, the easily available, readily cheap materials, wood, clay, dirt, wood and dirt, mostly. And I thought, well, plastic is the cheap, readily available material of our culture. And so we go to the store and buy things, we don't dig it. And so it seemed to me suddenly, conceptually right, that they start as these cheap, commercially available model kits.
Wow. Well, maybe, I hope one day that's what they should do with all the waste plastic, is make it into model kits. Like, just because you could recycle it. But I find that interesting because it is. It seems like everything has its place in some way of connectivity. I know it's symbolism, or symbolism, however you want to say it in this country. But to me, it's just everything has its place, and you're telling a story, and it's going to be different for everyone that looks at it, and experiences your art. But to me, and that's the beauty of art, right? But I find it fascinating because it just opens your mind. As soon as I saw your art, I just was like, I have never ever seen anything like this, and this is cool. And you start, it's trippy, man. It's like it's tripped out. And speaking with you, this is trippy coolness, man. I'm digging this. I just feel like you want to tell this story. I got into this I do some photography, but I'm into collages, and Nancy got into painting like mosaics. And remember oh my God, she would do these huge canvases of like the history of a community, and go from how people first went there to what it is of present time. And I mean, it was intricate and super cool. And I got into doing things where there's photos or pictures, whether or not I took them, and then doing African art kind of design in between them all as a mosaic or a collage, however you want to say it. It's kind of
doodle art.
Yeah, kind of like that, because that's my roots as Africa, man. And it's like, yeah. And then putting in different themes. I don't know. It's just, I want to go back and do that. Your artist made me want to go do art. I love that. I love it when that happens.
Well, I have to tell you a story about, you talked about plastic and how, and this is the great thing about an artist residency that you can never anticipate, is the kind of experience it exposes you to. We went on the hike. We're not too far from Hawaii's famous green sand beach, which is on the southern tip of the island. So you drive out, and then you have to park, and you have to do a fairly rigorous 2 or 3 mile hike to actually get to the beach, right along the coast. So it's a gorgeous hike. And we're hiking along, and we're just, beautiful vista of volcanic rock and the waves crashing one after the other, right? I start to see like a plastic laundry basket and this and that. And my first thought is like, who on earth would like dump their plastic laundry baskets and whatnot out here? And as you go further and further on the hike, this beautiful landscape starts to get peppered by all this plastic minutia. And it dawned on me, right? Nobody dumped this stuff out here. This is the plastic from the Pacific Ocean that they talk about. And there are various spots on Hawaii Island where it washes up regularly, and that was what we were seeing. And I asked myself this question again: am I an invasive species here? What is the resolution to this idea? Because for me, it's always problematic. You can always say immediately, well, this shouldn't happen. We should clean it up, right? But then you look and it's like, we need laundry baskets. So there's got to be, there's a tension in that idea that's very interesting to me. Or maybe the better question is, do we need laundry baskets?
Yeah.
Well, we used to have baskets.
Well, if you go in my bedroom, that's what
right. Yeah.
For.
But I mean, we used to have like real baskets.
Yeah, wicker baskets,
right.
and bamboo.
You didn't need plastic ones. In Kenya, the women there learned to knit plastic bags from the supermarket together to make handbags
and mats.
Right.
To have floor mats made out of them and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting too is that even this conversation, your art, is you're doing the seesaw balance. So it's like here, there. So there's this balance. You know what I mean? Like if you're sitting, but you're standing on the seesaw. One person, you've got one person on one side, one on the other. Well, instead, you're standing in the middle trying to balance it out. Like ask this question, well, how is that going to affect over here? So that goes with the ecosystem of life. So you're doing the ecosystem of between everything.
That's definitely the position I'm trying to stand in as an artist, is to make that thing that makes the viewer ask that question. What is the nature of this? Where are where do my values sort of relate to these things that I see? And so if I'm able to do that, I feel really successful and gratified.
This is amazing. I'm so glad you're there. I can't wait to see the art that comes out of this. I was going to say the production of this, because you're in the process, and I think that's so interesting. Chatting with you about where you're at in the process, that whole the creative side of it. When you're working things out, it's so cool. And then you get into it, and then there's always a detour. So, there's always a detour in life, right? And in art, so that's always cool too. I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you. This has been such a good conversation. And so,
well, thank you.
Do you want to do another residency with the National Parks-Arts-Foundation? Would you do it again?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Suddenly, it's the only thing I want to do anymore.
Oh, see,
because it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm starting to think it's like, wait, I have to leave. I don't want to leave.
It's like
I want this to be my life now. Right? Yeah.
Just where you can create and do and then contemplate. That's what I think is so neat. And a month sounds like a long time, exciting. And then from all the artists I know, they're like, we want longer. I think
going to Gettysburg for you would be interesting to see how you would incorporate your art into Gettysburg.
Oh my God, you've got to apply for the Gettysburg one. You should.
You know, I'm thinking that I'm going to kind of look around and see, because again, you know, just based on the other story, just the idea that, you know, something's going to happen to you during a residency that's going to inform your work, maybe directly, but possibly indirectly, but just inform your ideas. And it's just that and you know, like I said, I knew I could go to the park because I live an hour, you know, away from it, but I knew that there would be something that happened to me here that would be fundamentally different from that experience. And that seems to be happening, and I'm really excited about that. And you're right. It's like, my next question is, where else could it happen to me? And so Gettysburg would be a wonderful place to go for that reason. And I'm definitely going to look around. I'm hoping to do it again sometime in the future.
Awesome. Well, everybody, again, nationalparks-arts-foundation.org is the website to go to. Artists, musicians, and you know, those who are just interested in the artists and what's going on, go there. The one thing I know is to sign up for their newsletter and get connected with them on social media, especially Facebook and Twitter. When these opportunities arise, which they do all the time, they send it out, and basically you really don't always have like months to start, you know, to think about it. You got to do it. As soon as you see it, you got to do it, because it's how the grants work. And so, you know, and when the grant comes in, the grant must be spent. And this is what happens. So taken advantage of. So, and it moves really, really fast. So be prepared, have a resume together, have your bio together, have all those things ready. And just when you see the residency, if it resonates with you, go for it and look at, you know, what you can do artistically. I know that just about all the artists, I'd say just about every single one of them, have changed what their initial proposal was, changed as soon as they got to the residency, because of course that's called the detour again. So would you agree with me on this, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a glorious detour, you know.
Yeah, and they're very open to that, and open to all genres of art. So that's a really cool thing too. And musicians, I want musicians out there too, because I see like, you know, that happening. I know that Hawaii, they're opening more of that for musicians, and so a lot's going on. So again, nationalparks-arts-foundation.org. We got to give a shout out to the founder, Tanya Ortega, because she rocks.
Yes,
I mean, this is just such a cool program. She's really done awesome work, and her whole team behind her.
She's been great.
Yeah, man. Everybody, again, nationalparks-arts-foundation.org, and our website, bigblendradio.com, is where to go to keep up with our shows. We air Sunday through Fridays, and we list all the shows that are coming up. You can listen as a broadcast or anytime on demand. We have all the links to all the different podcast outlets, from iTunes to iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Blog Talk, all of that good stuff. And we always love to close with music. And of course, since you're in Hawaii, John, we have a song. It's now because Makana, he's amazing. He's one of the top slack key guitarist from Hawaii, and he's toured the world from the White House to China. And this is off of his album Ripe. It's Slack Menko, because he's going to, you know, add a little bit of this and that to it, because he can. He's really a cool musician. So everyone, makanamusic.com is the website to go to, but here it is, Slack Menko. Thanks so much for joining us, John.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here it is, everyone, Slack Menko.